Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Real Estate Coasters podcast. I'm Harry. I'm joined by Dr. David, and we have the awesome privilege of having Michael Pinter on this call. Michael, how are you?
I am great. How are you?
Doing well, my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. So I just want to start off with mentioning that you've been one of my mentors, so to speak. Well, I've asked you 1,000 questions. You're always gracious to answer them, so thank you for that.
My pleasure.
And I view you as a mentor. I mean, you're always helpful. You always answer things clearly. You're a no bullshit kind of guy, which I appreciate. So I just want to say thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So, Michael, just to kind of get into things, Harry's told me that you worked in some area of real estate, and then you went over and now you're doing wholesaling. How did you make that?
Sure. I was in the mortgage business working for the same company for 17 years, from 97 to 2013. And I'd say the last 9 years I was in the mortgage business, I was also dabbling in real estate. So since 2004, I bought my first investment property, but I was doing it on the side. When I left the mortgage business in 2013, I started full-time in real estate. And for the first 4 years, so maybe till 2016, I was only buying at live auctions or online auctions. And I wanted to be Tarek Musa from Flip or Flop. So I got renovated every property. And it took me a good 4 years to realize that may not be the best idea. And then I started
in New York and he's in California, or
no. Well, I mean, I still like Tarek Musa, but it wasn't a good idea because what was in my head, which was wrong, was that I was going to make this house every house that I renovated the greatest house ever, and nobody could say no to it. And the truth is that's ridiculous because people can always say no to a house. And very often the things that I was doing because I thought those were what the buyer would want, such as taking down walls and making it open concept like I saw on Flip or Flop, very often those are the first things the buyers undid. And, I would take down these walls and I would spend money to get a permit to do structural changes and put up posts and a header, and it would cost me $15,000, $20,000. And the first thing the buyer said to me, the first thing he's doing is putting a wall up there. And what I started to realize is that this notion that I have that I'm going to figure out what everybody wants and do what I think people want, I realized that was mistaken. So I sort of shifted. So I shifted on two different fronts. So 6 years ago, I started marketing direct to seller. So that was a big change. And I started realizing that the less work I did on a property, the better off I was, because less work means less money invested in the property, less time invested in the property, less surprises involved. There's a lot of surprises when you do work. And I always had the ability to do more work. So if I was on the fence about, let's just say, redoing kitchen cabinets, right? Let's say I did a countertop, but I didn't redo the cabinets. If I got feedback from people who weren't buying it or giving me offers that were too low because of that, I would find out why, and I could always redo the cabinets or do whatever the work was later. So I found that doing less work to a point where I can make money, and usually pricing the property below the top of the market, because I had done much less work to it, so I was able to market it that way, and it was a much better recipe for making money for me. It was quicker, It was cheaper. I always had the option to do more, and pricing properties below the top of the market, I thought and I still believe, is a better way to sell properties than it is doing everything in the house and then pricing at the top of the market, right? That's a very small segment of the population that's going to pay the absolute top of the market. It's a much bigger segment of the market will pay 5 or 10% below the top of the market, and most of them will give up, some notion of what their house is going to look like in return for that change. So those things really shifted about 6 years ago, and that's what I've been doing for 6 years.
So let me ask you to that point. How did you come to the realization that you don't want to be in the flipping game, that you'd rather be in the wholesaling game? And when you made that realization, how did you go about changing that strategy? Did you have anyone that you knew who taught you? So how'd you come to the realization, and then how'd you make that change?
So two things. First of all, I still do flip houses. Right? I don't wholesale everything. I probably wholesale about half the properties I go to contract on. I close on the other half. But I had a conversation with a guy named Brad Chandler from Express Home Buyers. So Brad Chandler. So two things happened. First of all, I started realizing, because I had gotten up to a point where I think I had 17 rehabs going on at one time, and at that point, everything really was falling apart. Right? I wasn't able to get enough good contractors that were good, let's say on one property or two properties. I was giving them 3 or 4 properties, turned out to not be able to handle any of the 4 properties that they got at that point.
As you mentioned in your video the other day, where they're good on they're good on project number 1, 2, maybe 3, and then the 4th one they become fuck up. So go.
Right. Or sometimes one they're good, and as soon as you give them a second one, they both turn bad. So I was getting to a point where materials were going to the wrong place, and I wasn't finding out about it. Contractors were maybe ripping me off, and I wasn't finding out about it. Municipal issues were coming up, so I was getting tagged for, let's say, a violation. I didn't even know about it. So I believe any business you build, if you get what you want, which is more business, and then you get to a point where you want to kill yourself, that's not a really good business, right? So I got to a point where
you scaled up too fast.
We scaled up. I don't know if it was too fast. I scaled up to a point where I could not even imagine getting enough good people to make it all work. So around that same time, and I was losing money on certain deals. Around that same time, I had a conversation with Brad Chandler. So he is in the DC area. He has a huge company. He did 1,500 rehabs, and he had just shifted from rehabbing to wholesale. And basically, had a conversation with me saying, "You got to shift to wholesale. Our markets are very similar. At the time, we were buying in the 2s and the 3s and selling in the 4s and the 5s." And he's like, and I found that very recently from the guy who had told him to switch from doing rehabs to wholesaling, who was Robert Wensley from Investor Lift, that what was going on with him was similar. That he was realizing that the more rehabs he was doing at one time, the more money the less money he was making, and the only deals where their projected profit was matching up, or the actual profit was matching up or exceeded the projected profit, were wholesales. And he, like a lot of rehabbers, thought, well, that's just stupid. Wholesaling is just leaving too much money on the table. I want to make this money. But this Robert Wensley actually showed him that it's not true, because there are a lot of things that can't scale when you're doing a lot of rehabs. Things are bad, especially in our area in Long Island, where the municipalities are really difficult to deal with. Permitting takes forever. The people are out there tagging you, stop work orders, even when you're not doing it.
It's different than the Bay Area here in California.
And we have tons of different municipalities. So there's villages here, like the village of Malvern. Village of Malvern, if you has crazy rules. If you replace 2 windows, you need a permit. If you replace 1 window and you wait a week, or replace another one, you don't need a permit. Little things like that. It's almost impossible to know all the little nuances. So, there are places in California where there's a lot of bureaucracy and it's hard, but a lot of permitting issues are still significantly easier than they are here.
Significantly different. Yeah, I've
Crazy.
never heard of that.
You can wait 6 months to get a building permit here. Like, that's not going to happen in California.
And every government official is trying to justify their jobs, and
right. There are villages that shouldn't even exist as incorporated villages, and you go into the village hall and there's 25 full-time employees sitting there. Like, it's insane.
Yep.
That's nuts.
So I just want to make it, for those who don't know, Michael, your forte is that you are one of the few large-scale wholesalers and flippers operating in the New York area. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I would say
Long Island,
in downstate New York, there are more people doing it in the 5 boroughs, which were right near the 5 boroughs of New York City. But in Long Island, there's very few people doing it. Most of the people doing it in New York City are auction buyers or, let's say, network buyers. There's not a lot of people that are consistently doing direct-to-seller marketing by us, because it's dramatically different in New York than it is in the other 49 states.
I just have to ask out of curiosity, because I do know some players in the real estate market in New York City. Are there any deals to be had in New York City, or is that just? I've been to an auction once. It's like the mafia over there, with like groups outbidding other groups. So are there deals in New York, or in New York City?
Tons of deals
In New York City.
There's 8 million people in New York City. There's going to be deals there for sure.
Fair. It's a market I don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole, because
I'm actually doing a deal in Brooklyn right now, and I'm probably doing a deal in Queens. I mean, they come up occasionally. I look at them when they come from students of mine. So they come up, but my problem is that I buy a lot of occupied properties.
Yep.
And it's much harder to evict somebody in the 5 boroughs than it is in Long Island and Nassau or Suffolk County. So I think I have 17 evictions going on right now that all started since the moratorium ended.
Any buy and hold deals in New York City, you think, or that's
It's hard. It's hard. It's very hard to be cash flow positive in our area.
but appreciation might be there. But I guess.
Yeah, but I can't hope for appreciation. I personally think we're going to be at some point. I can tell you without a doubt, at some point we're going to be negative appreciation. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know how much it's going to be. I don't know how long it's going to last. But the market is going to shift down. It's just a question of when, for how long, and how much.
New York City, interesting.
Everywhere, the whole country, we're due. We're 14 years into an upcycle. We're due for a shift. It's going to happen. I just don't know when or how much or for how long.
Fair. So let me ask you a question, because you know what, ultimately, I think from your perspective, my perspective, David's, you're in the marketing business. As far as we see it. So let me ask you, how did you come up with your so-called winning formula in marketing?
So ironically, that when I spoke to that I had that conversation with Brad Chandler, he gave me a somewhat some semblance of a marketing plan that I started with, and I've been adjusting it over time. But I mean, when I started going direct to seller, I started spending about $20,000 a month on marketing. Big chunk of that going for PPC. Big chunk of that going for mail, and I spent that for 9 months before I saw one dime from it. So he helped me by giving me somewhat of a marketing plan.
Okay.
But I was fortunate to have money coming in from all the flips that I had done were selling. So I had money paying for that from there.
I can imagine it being pretty unnerving unless you knew straight away that it's going to take this much lead time to spend that much money on direct mail and not see anything come through the pipeline for at least 9 months.
I didn't see money from it, but I saw leads and we had contracts. So I saw money was going to come from it. I mean, the first month I made all that money back. I mean, I did 2 wholesale deals that were, 6-figure deals. So, I mean, it's not like nothing comes from it. It's just that there is the cash conversion cycle, as Gary Harper calls it, is the time between when you spend money on marketing and when you get paid. In a lot of parts of the country, it's 2 months, 3 months, sometimes 4 months. In New York, I think it's over a year. I think it's like 16 months. So it's a very long time. And but it's not that there's nothing happening during that time. You're getting leads, you're going on appointments, you're making offers, you're getting contracts, things are happening. But to actually get paid just takes a very long time, and you need to be able to stick that out.
Fair.
How did you go from I'm looking at the legalities of things. I mean, and you're in New York. Where did you get the paperwork to go to someone and say, hey, here's this contract? Or did you have to say, how did you know to go to a lawyer, or where did you get this?
The whole flow.
Again, I had done a bunch of deals where we had closed on them and then fixed them up and sold them. But in New York, the contract is generated by the seller's attorney. So when a seller says yes in New York, there can be 2 to 3 months before you're actually in contract, because he has to engage an attorney who's going to send a contract to your attorney, which is almost certainly not going to be assignable because clause 26 in New York contract law says no assignability. Yep. And it's going to ask for a 10% EMD because that's standard in New York. So if you're buying something for $300,000, it's going to ask you for $30,000. Wow. So there's back and forth between the attorneys. That takes a lot of time. The attorneys get paid what most people in the country would think are exorbitant amounts of money, several $1,000s, and they figure they have to justify their fees. So they go over a lot of this stupidity back and forth, and it takes a lot of time. So, but I didn't need a contract. So that comes from the seller's attorney, and then my attorney and him duke it out as to what the terms of the contract are going to be.
So so I sometimes wonder, you've spoken about this before on your videos, that the profit potential is greater in New York than compared to other markets. However, it's so hard here. So it's really not for the faint of heart to operate in this market. Let me ask you, have you ever thought to yourself, well, wait a minute, New York is so hard. Yes, the profit potential is greater per property, but maybe I can scale even bigger in another market. Has that ever come to your mind? Because
I've done deals in other markets. Right? I did a couple of deals in Oklahoma City. I did some in Cincinnati, but I found that it was almost as hard to get the deal there as it was here, and the deals there were $10,000, $12,000. So I know my area. I like the fact that there's very little competition here. I would say most of the times I make an offer, over 60% of the time, I'm the only investor making an offer. Right? That does not happen in any of the hot markets in the country, right? If you go to Phoenix, Dallas, Vegas, you're competing with 25 other offers. Now, I've definitely lost deals to other competitors of mine, but very often I'm the only one making an offer. So I like that. I like the money I make. I think I'm averaging close to $40,000 per wholesale deal now, which you talk to somebody in any of the markets I just mentioned is, you need to do 4 deals to get that. And there are certain factors that I like. Like I like the fact that a seller cannot get out of a contract here. So I tried to do this in Florida recently, and I did not have a lot of success. I got one contract, and the guy backed out of the contract after. So it's what I know. And I know the area well, and I believe it's scalable. I believe there's a lot of deals that are untouched. And while there's pros and cons of every area, I'm pretty happy where I am.
When you do a wholesale deal, do you do a double closing?
So I've done a couple of double closes, but they're extremely expensive in New York. The closing costs in New York are absurd, right? So I'll tell you the deal. Best deal I ever did was 5 houses from one seller that I wholesaled to one buyer, right? I bought them for $750 and I was wholesaling them for $975. So it should have been a $225,000 deal. But because I was in contract on some other deals, I decided to double close. It cost me $40,000 to double close that deal. So I ended up making $185,000, maybe a little more, which was great. But
because of lawyer fees or?
Because there's title fees, there's transfer tax in New York, there's all kinds of fees involved in it, and it was so what is that, $8,000, $7,000 a deal? It's expensive to double close in New York. Now, the reason why you double close, the main reason why you double close in most parts of the country is because you're afraid that the seller is going to be upset at how much money you're making, or the buyer is going to be upset at how much money you're making.
Yeah.
The beauty of New York is it doesn't matter if they're upset. So I tell a story a lot where I think one of the first deals I ever wholesaled was a property in Great Neck. It was a $120,000 wholesale deal.
Wow.
The seller was a very militant, angry guy. And I called my attorney and I said, listen, should we double close? I'm afraid this guy's going to walk. And he told me something that has stayed with me, for this is 6 or 7 years ago. He said, the guy may be pissed off, but he can't sell it to anybody else. In New York, right, the way the language of the contract is worded, if a seller decides to change their mind and says, I'm sorry, I'm not selling it to you, you can file a list pendants on the property, which is the same as if he's in foreclosure. He's never going to sell that to anyone else as long as he lives. And you can sue him for specific performance for the entire purchase price, and you will win. And because they're represented by an attorney, their attorney will tell them. So I've had situations where a seller called me and seller said, well, I need more money or I don't want to close. And I just say, speak to your attorney. And then we always end up closing soon after. So there's really no need to double close in New York, and it's super expensive to double close in New York. So I don't double close unless there's some specific reason why I would do it. And that's the truth. So I usually assign.
So then on the flip side of that, no pun intended, the seller can back out, but what if you as the buyer realize, oh man, I think I miscalculated here. Well, what options or recourse do you have?
You don't have much. You probably will lose your deposit. I mean, I every time I go into contract there, I have no contingencies. I either have to assign or I have to close. That's another thing people don't understand, the difference between New York and other states. There is no inspection contingency in a New York contract. Right. Inspections get done before the contract gets signed, after you agree on a price. So when you're selling a property and a buyer says, you and the buyer agree, they schedule an inspection the next day, and any repairs they want done, they stick it in an addendum to the contract. So that's probably because attorneys in New York, who I told you are making several $1,000s on this when they generate the contract, they don't want to generate a contract that somebody can walk away from.
Right.
So I have no contingency. Now, a standard buyer to seller contract will have a mortgage contingency in it. But in my contracts, I have no contingency. So I always have to assign it or I have to close on every deal. I don't have any recourse unless there's a title problem. And I'm talking about that happened once or twice in my life. There's some kind of title issue that gives me an out. Otherwise, I got to assign or I have to close.
I'm curious, have you ever purchased a property, the inspection was done, the contract was written up, everything was good to go, and then you did your walkthrough and then you found that it was occupied? Has that ever happened to you?
No, because the contract language will always say whether it's going to be delivered vacant or occupied. But also, I never do inspections. Like I don't hire an inspector. I've had properties that I bought that had squatters that showed up. That happens, unfortunately, way too often.
Right.
And we can talk about that if you want, about what I do, which probably
I would like to know that.
your head.
Yeah.
Your brains might be better. But I've never had a situation where I was going to buy a property and something happened that made me not want to buy it.
Well, we'll just say that you deal with them cash for keys. Let's just say that.
I'd say that.
Yeah.
I try not to. I don't like to pay squatters. I pay tenants, but I don't pay squatters. Well, I mean,
so what do you do if you don't want to say that you don't have to? But
I'll tell you. So, a normal person, I think I'm a normal person, would say, well, if I own a house, right, and one day somebody decides to move in and change the locks, that the smart thing would be to call the police. The problem is that a lot of squatters today are sophisticated enough to create a fake lease. And what happens if you get to a property and the person and the police come and the squatter pulls out a lease, the police say, I'm sorry, this is a civil matter. It's not a criminal matter anymore. You have to take them to court. So first of all, think about that during the pandemic for 2 years where there was a moratorium. So I don't do that.
Know they were that sophisticated.
Yeah. Sometimes
imagine that.
So you have to judge. You have to sort of get an idea. Like I had a house in Valley Stream that it was next to a park where there were some drug addicts, and one of them like broke in, and she had mental problems. So for her, I'm not gonna do what I'm gonna explain. I'll do shortly. The cops came, took her to the hospital, showed the next day. They took her back to the hospital. I found that house she was getting in. I secured the place. But if I'm not 100% sure and I think somebody's doing that, I go in as a crazy person with a baseball bat and a crowbar, and I start breaking up my own house or my own. Sometimes there's staging furniture, and I'll break a lamp, and I act like a nut job. And I usually go in like 6 a.m. right when it gets dark, and I basically explain to them that I'm going to kill them, and that they have 5 minutes to get out of the house. And usually I see it sort of flash in their heads that this is not worth me pulling out a lease. And sometimes they pull the lease thing on me, and then I'll say, who'd you sign the lease with? And they'll go, with John. I'll go, okay, give me John's phone number. I want to call him right now. I want to find out who's leasing out my property. They always say something like, I don't know what his number is. I go, really? I go, what was going to happen if the electricity went out? What was going to happen if something broke? I go, I know you're not paying electricity because I am. And then then they start realizing maybe my story won't hold up when the cops are here. And acting like a nut job and breaking my own furniture and maybe punching a hole in the wall, I have 100% effective rate of getting them out of the house within 5 minutes.
Very nice.
And you're doing nothing illegal. So there you go.
Illegal, it's my house.
It's your house. There you go.
I don't think I'm going to physically, I've never had to physically assault somebody.
He's
but
breaking his own furniture.
I broke my own lamp. I broke a hole in my wall. I'll break something. And I need them to sort of click in their head. This is not worth it. Let's go find another house to move into.
Just like I said, not for the faint of heart. Not for the faint of
heart.
heart.
And it's crazy, right? Because I would love to call the police, but the problem is you call the police and you've hurt yourself. I buy houses all the time from owners of properties that call the police. And they call the police, and the guy whipped out a lease and basically told them, you can never call the police again because you're going to have to take me to court. And I bought dozens of houses like that during the pandemic. And they did what you think a normal person would do, but it just got them into the system. And during a moratorium, they had nothing they could do. And I bought the property at a severe discount because they were flabbergasted that the system was working against them.
Wouldn't the lease have to be notarized or some kind of proof that it's valid?
No, they're not notarized.
Jesus.
Anybody, I can prepare a fake lease in 5 minutes. The problem is if you ask the questions that I asked, like who is the landlord? How do I contact him? And they give you an answer like, I don't know. Then that story doesn't really hold up to much questioning, right? I know you're not paying electricity. I know you're not. Who are you going to call? Something broke. Who are you going to call if there was a problem? And then the story doesn't hold up. But if you just show that to the cops always, and the cops say, I'm sorry. Like they know. Sometimes it's happened multiple times. Like they know this guy. There was recently a case where where a guy did it for a year in 2 separate houses with the same landlord is like also a flipper. So it's horrible, but I will not take the chance that the cops come and say, yeah, take him to court.
David, are you aware if the Bay Area is as nutty as New York in this regard?
I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to evict people here right now. They're still using pandemic excuses.
Yeah, look, I was very happy. We got lucky January 15th that the moratorium ended.
Yeah.
Oh,
So things are back. Things are back to normal on that front.
now
I'm not sure. I'm not sure they're back to normal here.
Yeah, I don't think so
Yeah.
either. I think you guys are still waiting
Yeah.
behind.
And now all you have to do is just wait for the 5-year backlog of cases, and you're good to go, right?
So it's funny, I really thought that it was going to take a year after the moratorium ended to start evicting people, but the calendar is getting filled up. I have plenty of dates, and I got dates in March that got adjourned, of course, and then I have dates in April, and I think it's going to be back on track to like 4 to 5 months. So I'm very pleased with how quickly things are moving through the system.
The system functioning somewhat efficiently. Wow, that
Depends how you define it. It's functioning the way it functioned before.
So Michael,
that's pleasantly surprising.
Yes.
I don't want to take up all your time. I want to know, what was your horror story?
Yeah.
What is the deal that went wrong? And the one that we can really learn something from.
And
Sure.
Greg, and your friend Greg Hellback, he was so gracious enough to offer his biggest flop, and we're hoping you can do the same, because we learned so much from him describing he had a building where there was cat litter in the walls or something. What's your biggest horror story that we can learn from?
Sure. So when I was doing a lot of flips, I started making the same mistake on multiple properties, and I started losing money on deals because I did the same thing. So what happened was, I either took too long to rehab them, or I over improved them beyond what I should have. I looked at my numbers and I listed them for sale for what I wanted to make, instead of listing them for sale for what the market really predicted. So I think actually there was a time where I lost money on 3 properties, and 2 of them I really should have listed for $599. I ended up selling them for $600, but because I had investors who I wanted to impress, and because we were super tight on the deal, I priced them higher than that, $640, $630, and I really missed out on a chunk of the market that was looking to buy something in that area for $600. And I learned my lesson from those deals, because if I would have priced them right, I think on 2 out of the 3 I would have broken even. One of them I might have even made a little money because I would have sold them much quicker. But because I priced them too high, they just dragged on, and nobody made offer. It took months and months, and I ended up selling them for what I should have priced them earlier. So what I learned is, don't ever price a house based on your expenses, because the market doesn't give a crap about your expenses. The market has no idea what your expenses are. You have to price the house.
Keep it simple. That's like the main principle. Don't go overboard with this rehab, right? That's okay.
For sure. And I again, because I was managing too many rehabs at the time, things like this, deals started falling through the cracks, right? And they were at 90%, but I didn't want to put them I didn't want to list them because they still needed 10%, and finding the contractor to come back to do the punch list was a pain. And it was the same mistakes, but in the end, I could have saved myself over $100,000 if I would have just priced them where they were, which was at break even or even a slight loss, but get rid of them and move them, because the market was where it was, and my idiocy was, I'm going to shoot for a little higher because I spent too much money on it. So that was a nightmare period. That was the period where I started realizing that I don't want to do this anymore, right? I don't want to manage contractors, municipalities,
but you still do that right now, right? You said you still.
I do it much less. My goal, my goal is really to get to zero work. I would love to wholesale every single deal. I can't, because I'm buying properties sometimes that are occupied that I can't wholesale, or I'm buying them for more than another cash buyer will buy for, where I need to wholesale it, or I try to wholesale and I couldn't, so I'm going to close on it and do the work myself. That's just what happens. But my goal, if I could wave a magic wand, would be doing zero construction.
So I guess that brings us to our next question. What is your actual goal? What is your long-term plan? Are you eventually going to stop wholesaling, buy rental properties, and just wait for the checks to come in, or what's the plan?
I am fine for the next 50 years wholesaling and wholetailing as many properties as I can. I have no problem with that. I think it's a scalable business. It's great. and I love doing it.
And there's enough properties in Long Island to do this for the next 50 years.
Yeah, there's 3 million people in Long Island, and there's 5 guys that are going direct to seller. So think about that. It's insane, right? I think about places like Birmingham, Alabama, where I know a dozen guys doing, doing multiple 6 figures there, or places like Oklahoma, which has 2 cities in the whole state, Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And I know 7 guys making good money there. So yeah, I think in Long Island, there's plenty of deals to be had.
And and does that, and in terms of your plans, what they call mailbox money, which is usually like a passive, whatever, nothing's truly passive. But are you using any of your proceeds for any buy and holds and all anywhere, or?
Not really.
Not really.
No. I mean, I might, but I probably would want. I don't know. You know what?
It sounds like you like to keep your money moving.
I do. I mean, I've had rentals, right? And I find that a lot of rentals are really just savings account until the next capital improvement, right? So I'm cash flow positive, $500 a month. I'm happy. And then a year later, the roof needs to be repaired, and there goes my.
There goes 20 grand, yeah.
So it has to. A rental to me has to be significantly cash flow positive, and it has to be where I can get all my money out so I can do it again. And if something like that comes up, I'll think about holding it. But I don't know if I'm ready to really look at that right now.
So then let me ask you this question. Out of curiosity, I'm a big believer in, everyone has to save money, everyone, and money has to give a yield, and banks are not paying anything. So if buy and holds aren't really, what do you believe is a viable yield producing investment? Or is it the wholesaling? Is that your yield?
He's constantly moving his money.
I mean, I'm good on my business.
Okay.
Crypto seems good now. My son-in-law just started a crypto fund, so.
We should talk. And it's funny. I wonder if blockchain technology will have applicability to leases, because you can't. So that'll be interesting.
It may, but when I hear people talk about stablecoining, they're getting 15% on their money for just leaving it there for some new crypto investment that needs cash. Sounds great on one hand, and then on the other hand, I say, well, how many of those are going to go under at some point because nobody knew what the hell was going on with it? So
we should talk crypto. We should talk crypto sometime. I'm really.
I'm happy to. I didn't know much about it, but my oldest daughter's husband just left his job at Deloitte to start a crypto fund in LA, and it's very interesting. Very interesting.
Awesome. So final question. What do you think separates the winners from the losers, at least in the New York market? And I can tell you, and I say this with with flattery, like, you're not a meek, timid guy, and I feel like if you're meek, timid, or just apprehensive, like, this market will just eat you alive. So what separates the winners from the losers?
It's really perseverance. Like I told you before, how long things take. There's so many people who start in it and just don't stick it out. So I get calls all the time from people who say, "Oh, I bought a list, but everybody wanted retail." I'm like, "Yeah, that's every list." Or, "I bought a list and all the numbers are wrong." I'm like, "Yeah, that's every list." And I get the same people calling, and they really don't. It's really a function of how much they want it, right? If you really want it, you'll persevere through it. But it's also a matter of managing your expectations, right? So when I tell people to start doing this business and buy a list, skip trace the list, start calling the list, I go, you got to think in terms of 12 to 18 months before you see a penny, right? And for some people, that shoots them down right away. But the people who think, who go online and see some guru who said you're going to make money in 3 weeks, you're going to get a check for $12,000 in 3 weeks, and then 6 months in, they don't have any money. Or the people who tell me, I've been a wholesaler for 2 years, and I ask them how many offers you make, and they tell me 2. Right. I go, if you're making 1 offer a year, you're not going to see any deals for a very long time, right? So I don't think people understand, and I tell people this all the time. I go, you're going to get a list, and we don't have great data by us, right? We don't have a lot of public data available to us. I go, so you're going to get a broader list. I said, you're going to skip trace that list. I go, most of the numbers on that list are going to be wrong numbers. Most of the right numbers are going to be people who don't even know what the hell house you're talking about. Most of the people who have a house aren't going to want to sell. Most of the people who want to sell aren't going to want to sell to an investor. Most people who want to sell to an investor aren't going to sell to you.
Right.
So your job is to take a funnel of 25 or 30,000 numbers that you skip traced off a list of, let's say, 10,000. You got 2 to 3 numbers per an entry, and to just winnow that down to 20 or 30 leads and one deal. And then every 6 or 9 months, refresh the data and just keep doing that. And there's a huge luck factor involved. I could take that list and you could take that list. And I may reach 50 people that you never reach, and you may reach 50 people that I never reach.
Right.
So most people don't have the persistence to do that, right? Most people give up easily. They get into wholesaling because they heard some very good guru in some part of the country tell them that it's risk-free, which it's not in New York because there's no contingencies, that it's fast, which is not in New York because everything takes forever here, and that it's extremely lucrative quickly, and it's just not in New York. So I know that most of the people that get into this in New York are not going to be in it in 6 months or a year. So I'm fine with that, knowing that I am going to be in this in 10 years from now, and I'm okay with that.
Awesome. No, that makes sense. Like I said, it's that this market will eat you alive, and if you don't do things right away, it seems like perseverance is definitely a big factor. So, Michael, where can people learn more about you? And I know that you help out people who want to learn more about how to wholesale in New York. You provide coaching, but how can people learn more about you? And we'll provide the links.
So I post every day on Facebook and YouTube. I have my YouTube channel is called Flipping and Wholesaling in New York. Facebook, you can look me up for Michael Pinter, or you can go to my company's page, which is Real Property Buyers. And every day, and my office number is on all those posts, so you can call me in the office if you want. I'm happy to talk to you. And if you're interested in learning more about the services I provide, you can go to howtoflipnewyork.com, and you'll see some of the things I offer there if you're interested.
I was lucky enough to be like a beta tester for your initial course.
Right,
so
right.
I got an awesome deal on that one. And Michael knows what he's talking about. So whoever's watching this, Michael knows what he's talking about. So Michael, I want to thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, David.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I love learning from people. This was great.
Thank you very much, both of you. I appreciate being on. It was my honor.
Thank you.